Fenway rundown, 1st of December, first of the week. If you're watching on YouTube, I'm in the clearly need a haircut period of the off season. So just bear with it. Chris Cotillo here, Sean McAdam alongside after Thanksgiving weekend. It was, unsurprisingly, as we forecasted on Tuesday or Wednesday, not very busy for the Boston Red Sox. There were some moves around the league that we will surely get to, and some other things that we'll have covered on the pod. I'm going to be off the rest of the week, so that almost guarantees big fireworks from Craig Breslow in the front office. That's what seems to happen. We'll be both in Orlando for the winter meetings as of next Sunday, so this will be barring a real emergency. The last podcast we'll do before Orlando. We covered Sonny Gray the other day. And now as we sit here on December 1st,
has it struck you at all that maybe you shouldn't take as much time off as you do, given that things often happen when you disappear?
I mean, you're the one
just throwing that out there.
You're the one who forwards the memos.
It almost suggests that you're taking more time off than you should.
I would say you're the one forwarding the memos that we need to take all PTO by the end of the year. And that is...
Well, if some of us had observed the deadline several months ago, then perhaps this wouldn't have been an issue.
Carolina doesn't play Kentucky at Rupp Arena in June. So those are that's totally getting
that
snowed.
Definitely should take precedent.
It does take precedent, but we can guarantee Kyle Schwarber will sign tomorrow in the 9:30 range as that ball tips off, as it always does. We'll start with him. We'll start with the power bat search. Nothing's really moved on that market. The Red Sox have what we think is going to be their big starting pitching addition. We'll get to that, of course. But obviously the focus is a bat. As this has gone on and nobody's really moved, has anything changed in your mind about priorities, fit, anything like that when it comes to, let's say, the big three of Bregman, Alonso, and Schwarber?
No, I don't think so. I'm on record as saying that in a best case scenario for the Red Sox this winter, that Schwarber and Bregman would be a signing combination that would really lift them and I think put them into kind of the same conversation as the Blue Jays and Yankees for the division next year, coupled with the acquisition of Sonny Gray. Those are three significant upgrades. Do I expect that to happen? No, because I would think that combined, you're looking at somewhere in the $60 million figure for those two players alone, meaning Schwarber and Bregman. And I'm not sure the Red Sox are interested or invested to go that high. But in a perfect world, those are the two moves they make. I think Schwarber is a better commitment than Alonso, realizing that Alonso is still nominally a first baseman and Schwarber is really a DH only. I think Schwarber outperforms him offensively. I think he brings a lot of intangibles. And this is important. I think you can get him on a shorter deal. The expectation is that he's probably looking at 4 years. Alonso, being just 30, is probably looking for 6, 7, maybe longer. I don't think the Red Sox want to get into that kind of commitment and worry about what that would look like on the back end. So that's a best case scenario. Do I think it's going to happen? No, I don't.
Yeah, we'll get to your budget reporting ruining the weekend to Red Sox fans in a minute. But I think that my pecking order is probably Schwarber and then Bregman and Alonso kind of tied for second. I'm okay with either one. I think, as I've said a billion times, Alonso as a DH is a lot more attractive to me than Alonso as a first baseman. The fact that you can just put Bregman at third, that's obviously a big deal, but we both cautioned about not writing him a blank check, and obviously that market hasn't moved that much. And we both made the point, too, if you just sign Bregman, you're kind of back to even as it comes to the offense, not from where you started last year, because Devers is still not walking through that door. So, again, can't criticize them for what they haven't done yet. I would say Schwarber should be the priority. Jeff Passan today saying the Phillies are still, the favorite there. And that's something, important to remember in this market. Not just that Dave Dombrowski always gets his guy and that, the incumbent team has an advantage. Because I think once somebody's on the free agent market, you often see that advantage go away. But if there's real mutual interest to continue that. Schwarber has really established himself in Philly. If he really wants to do that, and they're just waiting to, stop playing chicken and settle a deal, there's almost nothing the Red Sox can do in that situation. I mean, obviously outbid them by 30 million might get the job done, but if he's dead set on going to Philly, if Dombrowski's dead set on getting him back, that might eliminate that possibility. We don't know at that point.
Yep.
Obviously, they're talking to other teams. I think an interesting wrinkle in this is two small market teams seem to be pretty interested in him. You have the Mets, you have the Phillies, and the Red Sox, as everybody's reported. But you also have his hometown Reds. This is a guy getting to the later stages of his career. That could intrigue him. A good team, too. They're not far off. And then the
Yeah,
Pirates.
playoff team from
Right.
last year. They didn't
Right.
last longer than 3 games, but or 2 games actually, but uh, still a playoff team.
And then the Pirates, kind of believe it when you see it type of thing with them going to outbid teams for a star free agent. But interesting that the market is crowded. Obviously, a DH like that is going to pretty much interest every team. The Red Sox are
Yeah,
one of
and
them.
I think that what expands his popularity and invites more bidders into the conversation is the fact that he's kind of split neutral, right?
Yep.
I mean, he's as, people say, well, the Red Sox are too left-handed and they don't need another lefty bat. Well, this guy's numbers are almost indistinguishable versus lefties and righties. So to me, you toss that argument out and it further expands the pool of interested teams who can look at him and say, yeah, he's left-handed, but he hits left-handed pitching almost as well as he does right-handed pitching, so we don't have to worry about that throwing the balance of our lineup
A
off.
correction on that. As I look at the splits, he's better against lefties. Against righties last year,
Yeah.
232, 33 homers and 86 RBIs and 448 plate appearances and 904 OPS. Against lefties, 276 plate appearances, a big sample. Hit 252, 23 homers, a 964 OPS, and that goes back to a couple years ago against lefties, 898 OPS, 824 against righties in 2023.
What's
he
the
was
career OPS number?
Well, he had a couple bad years that could throw it off. But survey says 875 righties, 778 lefties, but has been in the last couple of years like hitting
Yeah,
lefties has been an improvement. And
right.
left on left is hard. One of the hardest things in the game for an offensive player. We've seen even Devers struggle with it. There's a reason Casas
Well,
and
you were
Abreu
brave.
and Duran and some of these guys have their struggles or don't play. But this is a real unicorn in that way.
Yeah, and that makes him all the more valuable, even though, he is effectively a full-time DH. You could get away with sticking him in left field for 10 or 15 games if you had to, maybe even a handful of games at first base. Not anything you want to do on a even semi-regular basis, but for a run-producing offensive catalyst, hard to find a better name out there than Kyle Schwarber.
Yep, and in terms of positional fit, like exactly what Yoshida is, the Phillies last year in 2025, Schwarber played in 162 games. That would be all of them, Sean McAdam. And in those games, he played only 66 innings in left field, 8 games, 4 complete games. So 8 starts there, 4 complete games. The year before in 2024, he played only 5 games, all starts in left field. Uh, 2023 is when he was playing there a lot. The last 2 years, he's been obviously that DH who, in a pinch, if something weird happens with the roster, can give you a few games. And the only time he's ever played first base in his career was here, those 75 regular season innings in 2021, and then the playoffs. But it's exactly what you said. It's the Yoshida thing right now, where you're only putting him in there 1, 2, 3 games a year in certain situations at Fenway with a smaller area. That makes some sense. Are they going to want to do it every day? No. And do they need to? Well, with this roster, probably not, because of how many different guys that they have. We'll move to another guy that has emerged as a target. Alex Spira, the Boston Globe, has mentioned a couple times as the complementary bat, a guy that would slot in and be, not one of these high-end guys in the Schwarber, Alonso, or Bregman bucket, but a guy who does fit this team well. It is Jorge Polanco, spent last year with Seattle, and had, I think, a quietly pretty good year. Hit 265, but 26 homers, 78 RBIs, 30 doubles, an OPS plus of 134, which is the best of his career, I believe. A guy who played, a little bit of third base, a lot of second base, even slotted in first a little bit, which would obviously versatility is valuable for any team. I know this is a guy that you reported on when he was with the Twins and liked for the Red Sox back then. He had an injury that kind of torpedoed his value in 2024 in a free agent season, but coming back last year with Seattle was pretty good, and he's on the open market again. And I think, not going to break the bank, and he gives you flexibility if you do sign him to kind of figure out whether it be Bregman or Meyer or whatever you're going to do, first base. It's a puzzle piece that you could honestly sign now, and it wouldn't really affect everything else because you can't move him around.
Yeah, he could play some third, though he hasn't played there a lot. Second base, he's played there quite often. Probably about a league average defender at second. Not anything special, but not anybody that's going to be a liability. And although I think he's maybe played literally an inning or two at first base in his career, the expectation is he could make that transition.
Well, it was one appearance, zero point 0 innings. So I don't know how.
Yeah, that must have been a weird lineup thing. But something that he could probably handle and have time to figure out in spring training. Yep. You could effectively, he's a switch hitter, obviously, but you could kind of get into a platoon situation with Polanco and Romy Gonzalez hitting right-handed. You can move him around, as we said, first, second, third, DH. There are a lot of moving pieces here. Obviously, if you get somebody like Schwarber, you're not worried about having anybody fill those DH bats. You want him getting 600 plate appearances and leave him alone. But if they fail to get Schwarber, and let's face it, that's a long shot, then Polanco's a guy that could help you in a number of infield spots, and particularly being a switch hitter, someone that you could stick in the DH role at any point. Not the prototypical big bopper as you would, take note of in that spot. He's not going to give you 30 and 100.
I only had 26 homers last year.
A reputation for being a very good clutch hitter to the degree that those exist. I know a lot of people in the analytics world dismiss that notion, but you look at his numbers close and late. You look at some of his at-bats in the postseason for Seattle back in October, and in particular, he won that marathon deciding Game 5 in the division series. So that was huge, and a guy that, has a lot to offer, although he's not on the level of Bregman, Schwarber, and Alonso.
Yeah, the good news when it comes to Polanco is that he also has the dual splits thing going for him. Obviously, as a switch hitter, you'd kind of expect that. Last year, an 888 OPS against lefties, 802 against righties. The bad news is the StatCast numbers defensively are bad in 2024. Obviously, he was hurt at that time for a lot of that year, but horrible range and horrible arm strength. This year, it was a little bit better, but still, in the bottom 20 percentile on both things. So to me, it's like, all right, well, you're helping the lineup, but you're adding poor infield defense, which is, kind of what all these players give you, right? Like we talked about Alonso at first. He had so much pop, but also he's bad at first.
Bregman being the outlier, obviously.
Yeah, right. But as he ages, who knows? I think, the thing with Polanco that is intriguing, obviously, the MLB trade rumors projection on him, 3 for 42. That's not going to absolutely kill you. To me, it kind of reminds me of a better player, probably all around, of the addition of Kike Hernandez before 2021, of a guy that, all right, we're going to kind of just add him, and we'll see how the roster comes.
Figure it out later.
Yeah, comes around him. And that obviously, took on different life forms. He was the second baseman on opening day, then emerged as the center fielder. Then he was the shortstop that didn't go well for a year. But Polanco's not going to give you that much versatility. Obviously, the outfield's not going to be an option, but a guy that, if you sign with the floor being that he's playing a lot of second base, he's an upgrade over what you've had trotted out literally for 7-8 years almost, right? Because it's been that revolving door. And you can mix and match like Cora wants to do. That gives Romy Gonzalez a role. I think they're going to want to protect Meyer against lefties, and that's not going to sit. that's not going to sit well with Marcelo Meyer. It already kind of didn't because, you saw Roman get the leash come off immediately when they called them up and Meyer was not starting and there was guys, who was it? Sogard getting some starts at that time, whoever it was, I mean, almost doesn't matter. I think that's going to be the same this year. If Meyer is your everyday third baseman in air quotes, your everyday second baseman, where they're going to want to. Obviously, Romy can play first and has mostly the last year or two, but maybe put him at second, like you saw down the stretch. Obviously, he's great against lefties, so I think
Yep.
Meyer they're going to slow play like they do a lot of these guys, like they're still doing with Abreu on the left on left, having a guy with Polanco to mix and match, play one position against one-handedness, one position against another could make a lot of sense. Maybe he plays second some days, third some other days, can mix in at first. I think it makes a lot of sense, but that's obviously a guy that is going to have a lot of interest. A guy that you could probably imagine that Seattle's not going to be retaining after, going and getting Naylor and, still being in the market for maybe one more big addition too.
Yeah, they want a power bat, whether it's bringing Suarez back for a short-term deal or one of the Japanese corner infielders. Murakami or Okamoto, both could fill in at third, although the scouting report is not strong on them at third. Uh, I think people have the feeling you could live with them at first, but at third it might be a challenge if you've got Naylor playing first. That complicates things a little bit. One thing back to Polanco, I overstated his defensive play from a year ago. I thought it was closer to league average. It's not. One thing
Right.
that is not up for debate is that and it's another issue that the Red Sox have to address is putting the ball in play more. And Polanco did that a lot better in 2025.
Mm-hmm.
He had a strikeout rate of under 15%, I think, in 2025. I think it was 14.7, which came down more than half from the previous year. It'd be interesting to see what he did better and to talk to him about that in the event that he ends up here. But he cut his strikeout rate in half from 24 to 25 and puts the ball in play. So even if there are defensive issues, which would be called into question here, and his usability at what positions, at the very least, he's somebody that puts the bat on the ball and isn't going to strike out a whole lot, which is something they also have to be worried about improving.
Yep. And so, a guy I think makes a lot of sense. Like I think it just will be interesting to see where the is this an acceptable like outcome for fans if it's to me if it's like Bregman, Jorge Polanco, and Sonny Gray, I'm gonna say no. Is if it's Schwarber, Sonny Gray, and Polanco, is it different? Like I mean, that would be to me close because I like Schwarber that much. But I think in an offseason where you're looking at, everybody thought Joe Ryan, Schwarber, and Alonso is kind of how Red Sox fans have set the expectations for themselves. It'll be interesting. That'll bring us to some budget stuff. We'll kind of get into it based on what caused you to write that, which was one massive move in the AL East shortly after we recorded on Wednesday. Thanksgiving Eve, everybody in America drinks. Clearly in Canada, they were sober to get this deal done with Dylan Cease, 7 for 210, deferrals, all that. We'll start there. People looked at it and said the Red Sox get Sonny Gray, and this is the Blue Jays do this for Dylan Cease. I you're looking at it. I think the ceiling is higher on Cease. The floor is probably higher on Gray. Who's going to be a better pitcher in 2025? I think it's probably going to be close.
26.
If it's going to
2026.
2026, who was better in 2025? Probably Gray. So in 2026, I'd rather the 1 year. I again, like I said the other day, I think Clark could be good, and I think Fitz could be good, and I think 21 million is nothing to sneeze at. I would rather do 21 million and the two trade pieces than 7 for 210 for Dylan Cease. Part of that is
that's committing, big dollars for
Yeah.
a guy late into his 30s. And
and a
to
pick,
be
right?
fair, pardon me?
And a pick.
Right. And to be fair, Cease has been incredibly durable.
Mm-hmm.
He's made 32 starts, I think, 4 or 5 years in a row. He's gone over 200 innings in each of the last 4
And
years.
Gray's been pretty close to that too.
Yeah, he has. But so I'm talking about more the risks of the long-term
Yeah, right.
investment. Not to state the obvious, but I think we can say that the Dylan Cease 7-year contract is probably going to be pretty to really good for about 3.5 to 4 years, not so good for two, and absolutely lousy for the last one or two. So there's risk there, and it's a risk that we know John Henry's on record that he doesn't believe in. That is giving long-term deals to pitchers in their 30s. It's been very rare that he disproves that habit and theory. So I never thought that Cease was a target of the Red Sox. The money and the length and the age, I think, are all enough to scare them off. To me, Dylan Cease is a pretty good number two. And you just paid $30 million for him for 7 years. I think that's an overpay. And I thought the starting pitching free agent market was pretty thin this year with Framber Valdez and Cease at the head of the class. I still think that, and I still think there are better options on the trade market. And I'm with you. I'd rather have a year of Sonny Gray at what they gave up and what they have spent than be committed to Dylan Cease at 35, 36, and 37.
And it's not a vacuum argument where you can be like, well, pick one. Who do you want? Like it's totally two different scenarios. It's a 36-year-old versus a guy who's not 30 for a few more weeks. Um, it's a guy who's, a free agent on the open market versus a guy who has 1 year left on his deal, high priced, and is a trade candidate. So, obviously if Sonny Gray was a free agent, he'd probably get, high AAV 3 year deal probably at this point. Three for,
Mm-hmm.
80,
Three
something
for
like that, three for
75 or
75,
80.
something
Yeah.
like that. I think um, totally different. That doesn't mean that they got the worst of the two for 2026. I think there's a chance it could be better. You've seen Cease be, the ingredients are all there. When you look at StatCast, it's extremely red across the board most years. Last year, the FIP was good. The ERA 4.55, the FIP 3.56. Cy Young, two top five Cy Young finishes in 2022, which is his best year. Really, really good. 220 with the 184. He's a guy that very consistent with the expected numbers. Has a little variability with the ERA, but the durability, the high floor, I think, and the ceiling to be a Cy Young candidate. I think the fact that he's 29 as of this, will be pitching next year at 30. You get, ages 30, 31, 32, and 33. That could be pretty good for Toronto. And then, that's why these teams do those. You have to do those types of deals, and I don't think there's an opt out in that one. So it's going to be the straight, 7 at the back end. It could get ugly if the Blue Jays get over the hump and win that World Series next year or the year before, and he pitches meaningful playoff games. It doesn't matter, in 7 years. How many of these deals have aged super well other than like, Scherzer, right? So that's just the game. The other big AL East move over the weekend, Ryan Helsley goes to Baltimore. 2 year deal, 28 with an opt out. Guy who did not have a great second half last year. Still, gets an okay deal in Baltimore. Quick thought on that. We've seen Baltimore after a bad year, and this could be job saving mode for Mike Elias, make a really confusing trade of sending Grayson Rodriguez west for Taylor Ward, who's a good player. And then also now, getting Helsley, and looks like, they're a team that's being linked to Framber Valdez and some of these big names. They're a team that people forget because they had a bad year, but that young core is still there. One that's
Well,
dangerous.
I think people forget because the new owner, David Rubenstein, has not operated
Right.
all that differently from the Angelos family. And the
Hmm.
expectation was this guy was a native of Baltimore, hometown savior, comes to buy the team from the Angeloses, who had sort of been detached and absentee owners for a long time. He was going to ride in on his white horse and spend like crazy because he's a billionaire. He hasn't yet, but there are signs that maybe that's starting to change this winter. You hear them, as you said, on Valdez, maybe on a bat, maybe on another big name reliever. clearly they're never going to be in the Yankees, Toronto, even Red Sox area of spending, but this might be the year where they go a little heavy and realize that they've got to get people's attention, and there's a window here as a lot of their homegrown position players start to age and get closer to free agency. Players, like Rutschman and others on that roster who have perhaps not reached their potential. That window might be starting to close in a year or two. And the Orioles, in addition to Mike Elias wondering about how long he's going to be on the job, I think that they realize maybe the time is now.
Yep. Here's, I think what, people want to hear from you after yesterday. Here's some things um, column, we're talking about the Blue Jays spending big for Cease. The Jays potentially going after, obviously, Bichette, maybe Tucker. Um, People know about the Yankees. People know about, what we just talked about with Baltimore. You have this line, according to industry sources familiar with the organization's thinking, the Red Sox are okay going over the first CBT threshold set at 244 million for 2026, which would translate to them absorbing a modest financial loss. With anything beyond that, there's a reluctance to incur bigger deficits. Resetting the Red Sox payroll at Red Sox payroll does a great job. Estimates are usually pretty close. Has them at 225, almost on the dot right now. That's 19 short of the first threshold. You're saying the second threshold's in play. They're 39 short of that. Not, 60, but 39. Let's say 40 million. So there's room to spend, but not endless. And that's, a product of adding 21 million and Sonny Gray the other day. Take people through, especially your many doubters, Sean. Not me, but the people. Take us through that report from yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, I obviously there's only so much I can say about the information and where it came from, but it came from somebody that I trust implicitly that there is a feeling within the organization that while they are willing to absorb some deficit spending, and I know people are going to scream bloody murder about this, and I fully understand it, but it is the contention of some in the organization that once they get over that first threshold, they start operating in the red. You can argue with whether that's accurate or not. You can say that's creative accounting.
These people have access to ticket prices and concession prices, I'm assuming, right?
Yes, I would assume so.
Sounds good.
But I can tell you that the feeling is that they can return to the level they were at a year ago. That is, go over the CBT by how much? I'm not sure there, but the overriding sentiment was that once you start getting well beyond that first threshold, then they're absorbing losses that they don't think are sustainable. So all indications are that they can go over the first one again, and we fully expect they're going to. Obviously, there's a big move coming, whether that be Schwarber, Alonso, Bregman, something that's probably going to take them either over the 244 or really close to it, depending on how it's structured. And then after that, it's a question of how much further can they go. And the evidence I turned up talking to people is not a whole lot that, they can go over the first threshold of 244. But once they get past that, they are taking on deficit spending and not turning a profit, and in fact losing a considerable amount of money. I know there's a lot of shoot the messenger here. That's fine. But that is the information coming from people who would be in position to know.
Yeah. And look, I think, number one, there is money to move, theoretically. Like if they, all right, let's say the number's 40 million before that second threshold. I am and have been beating the drum. People think that there's still stuff left in the tank. I think with this roster, especially if you're getting Schwarber, somebody like that, Polanco, anybody, finding a way to move some of Yoshida's money is important. Would you attach a good prospect to get some team to take on the full thing? Like, if this is really an issue, you probably have to think about that. So some of that needs to be cleared. The
Yep.
other one,
Yeah, and
obviously,
it's not, just to explain to people, an outright release does not save them any money in
right?
CBT. You are committed to that money, and it counts whether the players in uniform are on your active roster or on your 40 man. Doesn't matter. If you are eating that money, you're being charged for it in accounting for the CBT.
Yep.
If you can get somebody to take on, what does he get? Like 2 and 38, right?
Yeah.
Was that pretty accurate? 2 years left for
CBT is like
$38
two and
million dollars.
33, or two and 36 on the CBT.
Okay. So $18 million a year in 26 and 27. If you can get somebody to take half, maybe even a little bit more than that by offloading a pretty good prospect to go with them, then that's something that they could explore and save themselves, potentially 18 to $20 million over the next couple of years. We'll see. There aren't really any other big ticket
Yeah.
savings to be had on that roster. We know that the guys making north of 20 million are people like Trevor Story, who's going to play an important role here, are people like Garrett Crochet, who no one is complaining about the money he's going to make the next 6 years. But there are limited numbers of ways to save with the existing roster, and um, that's one, to find somebody to take the DH and a good chunk of
Right.
his money off your hands.
And the other two I would mention, obviously, there's a ton of Duran trade rumors out there, always have been for years. If you do move him, that's almost eight, that's 7.7 that you could
Yeah, but I
see
think
yourself.
isn't the expectation that if they move Duran, they'd be taking salary back, right? You're not trading
Yeah.
Duran for prospects. You're
Well, if you
you're
if
going
you're
to get
getting
some.
a young starter, it's not expensive. You could save some money there. I
Yeah,
also think the one the one that I would say is no one's talked about, and I'm completely just kind of not making this up because it's possible, but you never know. What if you got a team who was, interested in Sandoval at that $9 million price and kind of well, we have other guys ahead of him and could move him. That could be a way to
I
free up
yeah,
10.
I
Who
I
knows?
would think that's too big a risk for somebody who hasn't pitched in a year and a half.
Yep.
The expectation is that like 99% of the people coming off Tommy John, that he's going to be fully healthy. That I think he underwent that surgery in June of 24, so he'll have had more than a year and a half. By the time you get to spring training, and he should be 100%, at least from a physical standpoint, but not having been back on a mound and thrown to hitters or any of that, I would find that a hard hard deal to pull off.
Yeah. Those are all speculative things. Look, people are up in arms about the CBT stuff. Last year they spent to 248. My expectation is that they go over that kind of because they have to. The real question that will have to be asked at a later on point, if they don't exceed that 264, as you don't expect that they do, is what is the real money being spent here, and why have the goalposts moved on that? And that would be in kind of response to the stuff we've talked about in the past, but you have, especially when it comes to, Roman Anthony, a $16 million hit. Well, he's really only making $1 million next year. And some of these other guys that are kind of in that boat where the cash spending doesn't line up, that'll be a pretty large nitpick for another day.
Yep.
Again,
Mayo, Raffaella.
yeah, we're not getting mad at them as fans for things they haven't done yet. But, I would say for everybody who, well, how do we know? I think we had a pretty good idea that they weren't going to go full throttle 2 off seasons ago when everybody was falling for that. And I think this is also in a different boat. Like that was cheap. Let's get under and make sure we don't spend. This is, there's still going to be a payroll north of, 250, 260-ish in that range, theoretically entering the season. It's still going to be a competitive roster with the chance to, add more at the trade deadline. Is it 300? Is it 350? No. But that's just kind of where, they are. And like the devil's advocate part of this is they got Crochet and Anthony on pretty good deals, and those are your two foundational pieces for years to come. That no free agent's going to be worth what those guys gave you, and those are commitments on the CBT starting this year of 28 and 16 for the foreseeable future. So that's those are there,
Right.
you know.
And, the crochet money is actually there's not a great separator between cash and CBT. I think it's
Right.
24 to 28 this year. So only a $4 million gap. And then after that, it kind of levels off where it is what it
Yeah.
is. He's making 28 and you're being charged 28 for it. But there'll be a big gap for a while. For not only Rafaela and to a lesser extent Bayo, because that's the oldest of the deals and that's starting to creep up. But the big one is Roman, who's going to be making, a little more than major league minimum, but you're assessed 16 million on the books for him. And
Yep.
that's, I wrote about that a couple of weeks ago, the difference between cash spending and the CBT spending.
Yeah, well, he's making in real money 2 million next year, 16 million on the CBT. And people forget because this guy is not somebody who factored in for most of the second half. Campbell is you're getting him at a 7, not massive CBT hit, but a 750 in cash spending. He will be making 2 or 3 next year, right? So it's another some
Yep.
of these discrepancies. These things happen, but it'll be interesting to analyze once we have the numbers in front of us. We can loop in local certified public accountant Dave Cotillo for a full accounting of everything. So, Sean, we'll see you in Orlando.
Look forward to it.
Yeah, sounds good. And I'm sure, again, big moves will happen this week only because I'll be in the air.